The ground shook once, then again, and every student around me went silent at the same moment. I am Daniel Whitfield, the only human in a class full of aliens, and I had exactly 2 seconds to understand that something had gone very wrong before my dog moved faster than I had ever seen him move. Let me back up, just for a moment, because you need to understand how we got here. 3 months earlier, I had been placed in an exchange program at the Vireth Academy, a school built for the brightest young minds across a dozen different star systems. I was there as part of a cultural study, the token human, proof that Earth had something worth learning from. Most days, I felt like a museum exhibit rather than a student. The aliens in my class were kind enough, in their own way, but they found almost everything about Earth amusing. Our music, our food, our clothing, and especially our pets. It started the day I shared a photo of my dog, Baxter, during an icebreaker activity. He was a big golden retriever mix, 70 pounds of fur and sloppy enthusiasm, wearing a paper party hat someone had put on him for his last birthday. He looked ridiculous, and completely unbothered by it. A student named Cavell, who sat 2 rows ahead of me, projected the image onto the main screen and could not stop laughing. "This is what your species keeps for protection?" he said, his neck feathers puffing out in amusement. "It wears decorations. It sleeps on soft cushions. Are you telling us this creature would ever risk itself for you?" The rest of the class joined in. I understood why. Compared to the creatures some of them grew up with, animals bred for defense with claws and armor and sharp instincts, Baxter probably did look like a joke. His idea of danger was a vacuum cleaner turned on without warning. I tried to explain that it was not about size or teeth, it was about something else entirely, something that does not show up in a photograph. But explaining loyalty to someone who has never felt it is like describing color to someone who has never seen light. Words were not going to be enough. I did not know it yet, but I would not need words for very much longer. 6 weeks after that afternoon, our class was scheduled for a field observation trip to a wildlife preserve just outside the academy grounds. It was meant to be simple. We would walk a guided trail, take notes on some of the local wildlife, and return before sundown. Companion animals were allowed, so I brought Baxter along. I did not want to leave him behind in an empty dorm room for 3 days. The preserve had rules about containment, fences and sensors meant to keep the more dangerous wildlife on their own side of the property. We were told the systems rarely failed. Rarely was the word that stuck with me later, because rarely is not the same as never. We had been walking for almost an hour, stopping now and then so our instructor could point out unusual plant life, when the ground trembled beneath us. At first, I thought it was some kind of machinery in the distance. Then I heard the fence sensors begin to chime in, warning, followed almost immediately by silence, which was worse. A young grass had broken through a weak section of the containment line. I had read about them in our course materials. 6 legs, thick natural armor, roughly the size of a delivery vehicle, and known for reacting first and thinking later when startled or cornered. This one had clearly been startled. It came out of the tree line fast, faster than something that size should have been able to move, and it was heading directly toward Cavell, who had wandered slightly ahead of the group to get a better look at a rock formation. I do not remember deciding what happened next. There was no plan, no moment where I weighed my options. 1 second Baxter was walking calmly beside me, and the next he was a blur of gold fur crossing the open ground between us and Cavell. He placed himself directly between Cavell and the approaching animal. I had never heard him make the sound he made in that moment. It was low, steady, and completely unlike anything that came out of him during a normal day of chasing tennis balls or begging for scraps at the dinner table. Every hair on his back stood straight up. His whole body had gone rigid with purpose. The grass slowed, just slightly, just enough. I found out later that animals like the grass rely on quick calculations, sizing up a target before committing to an attack. A 70-pound dog throwing himself forward with complete confidence, showing no trace of the fear that a creature many times his size should have expected, was not something its instincts knew how to process cleanly. That half-second of confusion gave the preserve wardens, who had already been alerted by the sensors, just enough time to arrive and secure the area safely. Baxter came away from it with a minor injury to his shoulder, nothing that could not be treated quickly by the preserve's medical staff. He needed a handful of stitches and a week of rest. Even with a bandage wrapped around him, he kept trying to push past the wardens toward Cavell, checking to make sure the rest of us were safe, refusing to settle down until someone convinced him that everyone was accounted for. Cavell had not moved the entire time. He stood frozen, staring at the dog who had just placed himself between danger and a person he had known for exactly 6 weeks, a person who, up until that point, had done nothing but laugh at him. Nobody on that trail said a single word on the walk back to the academy. 3 days later, once Baxter had rested enough to be back on his feet, though still wearing a soft cone to keep him from bothering his stitches, there was a knock at my dorm door. It was Cavell, holding a data slate, without any of the usual amusement on his face. "I looked into your species," he said, before I could even greet him. "Your animals were not bred to be weapons, they were bred to choose. Every single time, regardless of size, regardless of danger, regardless of anything reasonable." "That is pretty much the whole idea," I said. He was quiet for a moment, watching Baxter attempt, and fail, to reach his own stitches through the plastic cone around his neck. The moment Baxter noticed he had an audience, his tail began thumping against the floor. "On my world," Cavell said slowly, "loyalty is something that is arranged. Bonded creatures are trained across many generations to serve whoever holds responsibility over them. It works well. It is efficient. But I understand now that efficient is not the same thing as this." I did not say anything clever back. I did not need to. Baxter, sensing a new visitor and an opportunity, rolled onto his back right there on the floor, cone and all, looking up at Cavell, with the same simple hope he showed everyone, certain that this particular stranger was about to give him the belly rub he clearly deserved. Cavell, who had years of formal education, who had passed academic evaluations, most students on his homeworld would never come close to matching, lowered himself to the floor without hesitation, and gave the dog exactly what he wanted. "I withdraw everything I said before," he announced, mostly to the ceiling, since Baxter had already flopped over contentedly against his arm. "Your species did not create a weapon. You created devotion. That is a far more serious thing to underestimate." Baxter responded by licking his face, which made Cavell laugh. A real laugh this time, nothing like the mocking sound from 6 weeks earlier. Word about what happened on the trail spread through the academy quickly. Within a few days, students I had never spoken to were stopping me in the hallways, asking quiet questions about Earth animals, about how they were raised, about whether creatures like Baxter were common or rare. Nobody made jokes anymore. The photograph that had once been a punchline was now something people asked to see again, this time with genuine curiosity instead of laughter. One of the older instructors, a Virith scholar who had spent decades studying different species across many worlds, asked to observe Baxter during his recovery. She told me she had read reports about Earth animals before, but reading about something and watching it happen in front of you were very different experiences. "Bonding through choice rather than training is rare in the systems I have studied," she said, watching Baxter attempt to steal a snack from my hand with his usual lack of subtlety. "Most species that value protection breed for strength first. Loyalty is treated as something secondary, something added later if it happens to develop. Your species appears to have done the opposite." I told her that most people on Earth never really think about it that way. A dog is just a dog. Until, of course, you see what a dog is actually capable of. By the end of that semester, several students in my class had submitted requests to the Academy administration asking whether Earth animal companionship programs might be introduced for future exchange students. Cavell was the first name on that list. Baxter healed completely within a few weeks, back to his usual self, chasing anything that moved and demanding attention from anyone within reach. He never seemed to think what he did was unusual. As far as he was concerned, someone he cared about had been in danger, and the only reasonable response was to do something about it. That is the part I have never been able to fully explain to anyone who did not grow up around dogs. It is not about size, it is not about training or breeding or careful calculation. It is something simpler and, somehow, much harder to create on purpose. I have thought about that day on the trail many times since. About how something so easily mocked, something reduced to jokes about party hats and soft cushions, turned out to hold something that an entire academy full of advanced civilizations had never quite managed to replicate. Nobody at the Vireth Academy ever laughed at a picture of an Earth dog again. If anything, they started asking if we had room for one more.